Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and yourselves, just the team. Not just the team, you are the team. You're the best team in the world. You'd beat anyone at anything, always. Lots to talk about today, lots of geopolitical stuff to talk about, and I can't wait to talk about them because I just love talking about this stuff and I find it interesting. And we've got a bit of a range as well. I don't just like to throw explicitly or exclusively, Ukrainian stuff at you or stuff to do with Ukraine. However, we're going to start with where I am sitting in my head at the moment with regard to Ukraine, with regard to the war, military side of things. And I'm going to hit you with some sort of breaking news at the moment that's sort of coming out. And then we're going to talk about oil and gas as well, because there's also some interesting news coming out from places like Hungary and Romania. So, okay, let's start with where I'm at. You might have noticed recently in the last week, I have been a little bit down, actually, not in terms of my disposition. I'm always existing in the sunny uplands of reality. Psychological reality. No, in terms of where I think Ukraine are at, this last probably month, I think has been particularly difficult for Ukraine. And it is, I think, a very difficult time for Ukraine because of Russia's ability, and I think it's asymmetric at the moment, to hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure in a way that Ukraine can't do that to Russian energy infrastructure. And by that, I mean not hydrocarbons, I mean energy production, substations, all that kind of stuff. Like I've said to you before, Ukraine is a smaller country than Russia, and for Russia to fire into Ukraine, it is easier for them to hit stuff than Ukraine firing out into Russia. They have to go across the same borders. In fact, Russia has an advantage. They can fire from the sea. They can fire from strategic bombers, and they can fire from the ground, and they can fire from within Ukrainian occupied territories. And so because they've got this range of weaponry that they can use that Ukraine doesn't, it means they have an advantage. They have stockpiles of missiles that are far greater, or have traditionally been far greater than Ukraine's, and they can fire them from more places. Both sides fire across broadly the same border area, but actually, as I say, Russia can really fire from more places, and also they can possibly utilize Belarus far more, well, certainly more than Ukraine can utilize Belarus. So Ukraine can't fire up into Belarus. Russia can fire through Belarus themselves. So I think Ukraine is at a disadvantage, a natural disadvantage to the Russians, and that means Russia can do more harm to Ukraine at the moment. And they are also changing the way that they are striking Ukraine by going oblast to oblast, region to region, and taking out their energy infrastructure in a very concentrated manner. And I said in my hits and losses video this morning, annoyingly, that's something I suggested they did probably years ago. Both sides, actually, they just need to overwhelm smaller areas, single targets, really, and do their attacks those ways, and not just send lots of missiles and drones to a big area. Right? I think that is because, especially since you have to get over the same border areas, you just need to line your air defenses across the border areas, across those common pathways, and then so on and so forth. But defensively or offensively, it is easier to completely destroy a place than somewhat destroy lots of places. I think you pick one place and you go to town on it, and that seems to be what Russia is doing at the moment. And they are, if you can take 60% of Ukraine's gas production out in one night, that you're onto something. So I think Ukraine are naturally in a precarious position at the moment. So how do Ukraine get the advantage then? I don't think Ukraine is in a position to regain lost territory militarily. They can maybe take the odd square kilometer here, do a little bit up in Sumy, take some stuff back there. But I think broadly speaking, at the moment, unless something significant changes, unless there's a collapse in morale that causes mutiny or whatever, I think Russia would just keep bleeding Ukraine. The ratio is far more in the favor of Ukraine, but unfortunately it just means that Russia will grind on taking grind away at the Ukrainians, taking square kilometer after square kilometer. And that will go on. And then you look at the maps, you think, well, Russia's winning this war, but actually the cost for Russia is stupendous. However, they don't seem to care too much about that. So what Ukraine needs to do is, I think Ukraine's only option for militarily taking back territory is a complete economic collapse. It's nothing I'm telling you now is anything I haven't said before, particularly. So they need this economic collapse, which I think is happening. And the frustration for me is that the US could have come in under the Trump administration and very successfully forced Russia to buckle. And Trump would have been hailed as great for doing that. Right, he could have come out the hero here, but instead he's appeasing Putin at every conceivable opportunity. So either they have compromise on him, or he is a useful idiot and easy to manipulate. And I oscillate between those two options. But he's not being strong on Russia, but he could, and Russia's economy could collapse if the full might of the US focus was put on that. The other thing that needs to happen is Ukraine needs to hit Russia from a distance. And this is my segue into where this video is really starting. This is a preamble. I'm going to give you some news, which fingers crossed. So Ukraine needs to hit Russia from a distance because they don't lose troops in doing that. So they need to hit them with FPV drones, Mavic drones, and IED dropping drones, and Vampire drones, and all those short-range drones that Ukraine has had somewhat of an advantage in some areas over some period of time. But however, it is swings and roundabouts there because Russia had the fiber optic drone advantage, and they might be getting back some more advantage in terms of the sheer numbers and stuff. So, so there's that. Then there's the near rear, which Russia has had the advantage, but now I think Ukraine is able, or should be able to. But it's all about scale, and it's all about protecting your military-industrial complex. And I think that is what Russia has also struck in the last month, 2 months. I think, and throughout the course of the war, but particularly recently, I think Ukrainian military-industrial complex has been really hit. There's just speculation, but it seems to chime with the expectation of there being loads and loads of Ukrainian drones and missiles, and then it didn't quite happen. It hasn't quite happened, although hopefully right now we might be seeing something happening. More of that in a second. Okay, so the near rear, Ukraine has shown in Crimea that when they are striking with really decent drones, or decent enough drones, these Beaver drones, and then other types of drones I think they're using Crimea, where they're packing enough of a punch. So you've got these which ones is it? The FP2, is that the near rear drone, the 200-kilometer drone, or is that the FP1? Anyway, I'm sure you'll correct me. One of the FPs, Firepoint drones, has that near rear, that 200-kilometer range, and Ukraine needs to be doing lots of that. And by lots of that, they just need to scale up. People talk about game changers. They say F-16s aren't a game changer, Flamingos aren't a game changer, Storm Shadows aren't a game changer, this isn't a game changer, ATACMs aren't a game changer. Yes, they are. Every single one of those things is potentially a game changer. The only way they become game changers, though, is scale, right? All of those game changers, I don't care what anyone says, I will argue this till the cows come home. Every single one of those things are game changers. If you had 10,000 ATACMs now, that changes the game. You just fire them off willy-nilly. You have enough launchers, you fire them off willy-nilly. You just use them on the front line. You just obliterate the crap out of the Russian forces. So it's not so much that the tech or the weapon itself, is some wunder weapon, right? It is the scale of these things. And if they had, that's why I keep saying, if they had another 70 jets, the Ukrainians, that would be a game changer. Just F-16s, Gripens, whatever. Just another 70 jets, throw them in there, and munitions, do their thing. If they had 1,000 Storm Shadows now, awesome. If they had 1,000 Flamingos now, awesome. So it's about scale. It's about scale and distance. So just striking the crap out of the near rear, and then going to town at distance on hydrocarbon infrastructure, air bases, so on and so forth. And the frustration with the American situation is not only they're not putting pressure on the Russian economy particularly, but they're also not putting pressure on the Russians by giving Tomahawks to Ukraine, which I think should have been an easy win there. Now, what we're seeing right now, yes, so hopefully, you know, just sheer scale, you understand that it is the game changer. So if they had, you know, like I say, like 20,000 flamingos, then that'd be awesome. Okay, so right, we're going to look at what's going on right now. So Max 25, about 44 minutes ago, it says here, there are 11 Ukrainian aircraft in the sky. We are expecting Storm Shadow launches, according to a Russian mill blogger. Then we had Moscow region missile warning. Then we had Russian monitoring channels are on edge. 11 Ukrainian aircraft are in the sky, and there's all the screen grabs for that. And then we have this drone bomber map, which is useful. So this one here, red arrow are strike drones, blue arrows are jet powered drones, and the green arrows are cruise missiles. So we apparently have cruise missiles going north. We have cruise missiles coming across, possibly going for, I don't know, Krasnodar there, across the Sea of Azov. So okay, 11, but again, this isn't like huge. It's 11 missiles, or 11, maybe, I don't know, 22 missiles, however many missiles they carry, depending on what they are. But it's something, and that's why I say, look, imagine that, but happening every single afternoon, and then times that by 2. And then that is what Ukraine needs. So they need scale of missiles, and they need scale of economic sanctions, where the US is absolutely part of it. The US is a key to being able to pummel Russia and bring them to the table. But Trump at every opportunity has appeased rather than coerced. And that is a massive disappointment. And there is no way that Donald Trump should ever go down as being a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Now, you can say, well, why would he be a Nobel Peace Prize winner if he's like piling weapons into Ukraine? But, you know, it's about your vision of the world, right? And your vision of the world should be one that is not rewarding the aggressor. So, you know, what Donald Trump is doing at the moment, and I made a really big point on this on one of my earlier videos. In fact, I think I ranted quite a bit in my last video on the peace negotiations. I probably should have put that on the thumbnail. You should all go and watch that later. That is, I think, an important video that I've done. But yeah, just he is advocating, everything he's doing at the moment is literally making advocacy for the aggressors in the world getting what they want. That frustrates the hell out of me. So, you know, being strong in defending Ukraine is therefore being strong about defending the rules-based order and saying no to aggressors. Tim White here talking about needing to get the popcorn ready. A surprise tea time attack by Ukraine with a mix of drones and missiles. Russian monitors claim Storm Shadow and Flamingo missiles are flying, but of course, you know, they often do that. And you never quite, never often is the way it is claimed. However, there you go. That's a Bryansk region. So there definitely are missiles going. That could be any number of missiles, to be honest. I'm not even going to throw out what it could be, what I think it could be. But anyway, that's Bryansk region. That fits in line with what was just being said there. So there you go. And that's what's going on right now. I'll keep an eye on that, and you guys keep an eye as well. Let me know if there's something that is big that's happened. Put a capital breaking in front of it in the live chat, and I'll be more able to see that. If Benny Pie is in there, just let me know, and you can let me know through WhatsApp or something. Okay. So we're going to stay on this idea of striking at distance and hydrocarbon. Well, actually, we're going to talk about oil and gas and hydrocarbons. But actually, first of all, we're going to go to Europe. So some fairly breaking news is that 2 major oil refineries tied to Russian crude oil have exploded within 24 hours in Eastern Europe. So first in Hungary, a blast has hit the MOL refinery supplied via the Druzhba pipeline. And in Romania, the Lukoil-owned Petrotel plant, 2.5 million tons a year, has also suffered an explosion. Wow. Okay, this looks a little bit too coincidental to be a little bit too specified in its complexity to be just coincidence, right? Another refinery of Russian oil was on fire overnight, said Tim White, but there's a twist. This one's 27 kilometers from Budapest at the Danube refinery in Százhalombatta. The blaze was reported to have started after an explosion, but Hungarian emergency services say the fire's now been contained. Interesting. Hungarian refinery owner MOL stated, quote, "There is no indication of external influence. The refinery has been restarted and the fuel supply is ensured." However, Prime Minister Viktor Orban posted this on Facebook, which says, "This morning I discussed this with MOL executives and the Minister of the Interior. Hungary's fuel supply is secure. We will investigate the circumstances of the fire as rigorously as possible." So who knows? But it seems rather bizarre that two Russian-connected refineries, pieces of infrastructure, have exploded essentially within 24 hours of each other in Eastern Europe. This is the one in Romania's Petrotel Lukoil refinery, owned by Russian company Lukoil. It's one of the largest in Romania, and an explosion happened there as well. Of course, if Ukraine are going to be doing something like that, that is a really high-risk strategy. I wouldn't for a second advise they do something like that. But hey, Nord Stream pipeline went down, so who knows? And here we now move on to Japan, saying it's working to reduce dependence on Russian LNG, liquefied natural gas. It aims to curb dependence on Russian liquefied natural gas, but can't immediately halt imports despite growing pressure from the US. As according to Bloomberg, LNG supply from the Russian Sakhalin-2 export project accounts for about 10% of the nation's total imports of fuel. So that's a pretty big move from the Japanese there, and that looks to support Ukraine. EU countries, according to Agence France-Presse, AFP, agreed to stop importing Russian gas by the end of 2027. So this is a big move from the EU. They're trying to really stamp down this formalized finish to Russian energy independence. The measure, which now must be approved by the European Parliament, was proposed in May by the European Commission. So that's good news if that gets through the European Parliament. Then we have this, which is Anton Gerashenko. Well, actually not him. This is Donald Trump. Now, I posted the other day that Trump said, hey, India are going to be curtailing their Russian hydrocarbon imports. And he was asked about this, both India and Hungary, in a presser.
That message to India and Hungary was still refused.
You said India and Hungary? That's an interesting. India and Hungary. It's an interesting combination.
Refused to stop buying Russian oil.
Well, India is not going to be buying Russian oil anymore. And Hungary is sort of stuck because they have one pipeline that's been there for years and years and years, and they're inland. They don't have sea. And I spoke with the very great leader of Hungary, and they are, it's very hard for them to get oil. I understand it. Hungary's in a very interesting position because they can't have ports. They're surrounded by land. So we'll see what happens there. But India,
which is a bit weak. We'll see what happens there. Of course, Orban's his great mate, right? Okay, so he's really strong on the rhetoric until it's someone that he likes, and then he just capitulates. And that's his approach to Putin. Honestly, his approach to Orban is pretty much the same as his approach to Putin.
Will not be buying oil from Russia. And they've already de-escalated.
India is talking about.
They've more or less stopped. They're pulling back. They bought about 38% of the oil.
So he said, well, India have stopped. They're pulling back. They pretty much stopped, etc., etc. And then we have this, which is India says they're not aware that they promised to stop buying oil. So the rhetoric doesn't fit reality.
Reports, and you even mentioned that there were a series of phone calls call with Prime Minister Modi, and that Modi had said his country would stop purchases of Russian oil.
Yeah, he's going to stop purchasing.
But India said that they were not aware.
Well, then they're going to just keep paying a lot of tariffs.
Did you have the phone
if they said
call,
that, but I don't believe they said that. No, I spoke with Prime Minister Modi of India, and he said he's not going to be doing the Russian oil thing. So that's it.
But why would India say that they're not going to do it?
I don't know, but if they want to say that, then they'll just continue to pay massive tariffs. And
so it's odd that Trump seems to do an awful lot of policy and politicking from press conferences and from jets. Like, I don't get it. Like, so often he's presented what appears to be new information by bloody journalists. And he's like, oh, I didn't know that. You do realize that India have said they're not going to be cutting back on oil imports from. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, if that's the case, then they're just going to be hit by big tariffs. It's this idea that, well, you should know that, mate. You need to take a ton more briefings, because, like, either you're woefully ignorant, or you're willfully ignorant, or you're just pretending to be ignorant so that you, I don't know, don't have to say the things that you otherwise would have to say, or whatever. But yeah, that worries me somewhat. Okay, now we're going to go on to we're going to move off from oil onto just regular geopolitical shenanigans. I hope everyone is good in the live chat. Thank you for being here, guys. Aussie Rob, always appreciate the support. Could Ukraine gain scale by manufacturing their kit offshore? Okay, great question. And actually, this is what is happening. So Ukraine started. Okay, so initially, the evolution throughout the war was Ukraine was just given weapons by other nations. I've been through this a million times. So given weapons, and then certain countries kind of ran out of weapons to give, either from their own manufacturing, because they don't manufacture those types of weapons. They only have a certain amount of, like, indigenous defense manufacturing, so they could give them a bunch of stuff, and then you don't need more of this. Okay, so what do you do then? So you got two more choices. So if I'm not giving you our weapons, I am buying weapons for you from another country. But then Ukraine doesn't get the tax dollars from people working inside their own country building that stuff, and that's not an economic stimulus for Ukraine. And actually, Ukraine can often build those things more cheaply. So if it's not something like a Patriot system where only the US is, or broadly speaking, they are making interceptors now in Germany, and they do make them in Japan, blah blah blah. But, you know, essentially there are certain things you have to buy from certain places, but otherwise, can we get Ukraine to buy it? So what the Danish model was Denmark started then giving money directly to Ukraine and said, go and build this stuff. You can build twice as many of these with money being given to you in your own country than we can build over here, right? So we're going to give you the money. And then you saw a massive ramping up of scale in manufacturing in Ukraine. But then you had this situation whereby we've got this potential up here, but we can only build this much because you haven't given us enough money. There is not enough money to reach the potential, to bridge a gap between actual and potential. Okay, so that's one challenge. The other challenge is it's now, I mean, this is great. We are building loads more stuff, and it is cheaper than over there. But actually, we're also getting our factories bombed, hit by missiles, hit by drones routinely every single night. And so you had this localization of production that went into Ukraine. And now you've got this situation where the localization is now coming back out of Ukraine, where they're building Ukrainian stuff, but outside of Ukraine. So we've got this big $200 million drone factory, pound drone factory being built in Suffolk in the UK. You've got Denmark has been localizing production. You've got Germany localizing production. A load of countries are now taking some of these Ukrainian weapons and then building them outside of the country to build that scale up, but then to keep them safe from being blown up by the Russians. That is one way around it. So we're seeing a mix of all of these things, and then that the benefit for, say, Denmark for doing that would be that actually they're starting to see they would see an investment of their tax dollars or their tax euros into their own economy rather than sending it either to Ukraine or to a third country. So all of these are considerations, and then it depends what your metrics of success for all of these decisions are. Is it your own economic stimulus? Is it Ukraine's economic stimulus? Is it Ukraine getting the most weapons, the most bang for the buck? Is it the type of weapon? Is it not wanting to give the US too much because we're having arguments with the US, so trying to get it from somewhere? You know, all of these are metrics of success with how to best spend your dollar or your euro or your pound. But yeah, certainly there is, I think, a massive scaling up. We've seen a scaling up with artillery ammunition. We're almost getting to a point where there have been some people wondering whether now actually there's too much capacity for artillery ammunition going forward, because you've got the Nordic nations are ramping up. You've got Rheinmetall and loads of European and BAE systems, European concerns doing it, and then over in the US, and now we're seeing that drones are being used so much more. Okay, right, let's go on to Poland next. They have arrested at least 7 agents working for Russia and preparing acts of sabotage. Romania's captured 2 agents placing bombs inside parcel deliveries intended for later detonation. So that is good news there. Or bad news that they are active in those countries, but good news that they're onto them. So happy days for the intelligence services in those 2 countries. Then this is raising its ugly head again. If you remember, I spoke to Philip Abaji Jr., who was a Nigerian journalist who's been reporting an awful lot on what Wagner are doing in the Sahel region of Africa, but also we had a chat in that live, very well worth watching that live. Go back if you haven't seen it, still relevant now, talking about the migration routes through North Africa up to Libya, and then warlords there, you know, getting essentially, there's Russian influence in all the countries on this route. You have radio stations talking about what the best place to go if you want to, you know, migrate north and up into Europe. And they are pumping out Russian disinformation. Russian disinformation is rife, but this is all about sowing discord in the EU. They know that immigration is the big thing that gets people really, really riled up. And it's the most divisive topic in Ukraine. So it's the most divisive topic in the EU. Sorry, I'm looking at various messages. And this is a really good return on investment that Russia get by, you know, paying people, I presume, off in Libya to send African migrants up into the Med, up into Italy and wherever, Spain. And then, you know, maybe they get as far as the UK, or they go all around Europe, and this causes social cohesion issues. And this is absolutely what Russia want. Now, even the Daily Mail reported on this some time back, saying actually Putin is behind immigration coming into UK, right? That's really good. What we want are mainstream media outlets to talk about this, because actually, if we recognize this and people are really genuinely annoyed with immigration, which an awful lot of society is, right? What you want is them to start blaming Russia, because in the UK, for example, the sort of people who are very anti-immigration are going to be probably, not entirely, but many will be pro-Reform UK, right? Reform UK have these connections to Russia. We're going to come on to this later in the video. And a really good thing to do would be to get a much more universal understanding that Russia are behind some of our immigration issues and woes and concerns. And if more people understood that Russia are the bad guys here, then you have just much even greater cross-party support for assisting Ukraine and seeing Russia as the bad guys. And that's only a good thing. So even if, say, for example, Reform do get in the next election, I'm talking about UK here, but this is applicable to anywhere. If Reform do get in the UK, then I would hope that at least they're going to be hard on Russia if they understand that immigration is being perpetuated the immigration issues are being perpetuated by the Russians. So anyway, Russia continues expanding its operations, pouring African and Middle Eastern migrants into Europe, having now recruited Libyan assistance. Gaining support for far-right pro-Russian political parties is really as simple as this. Yeah, Putin's warlord ally flying migrants into Europe. Libyan strongman helping Kremlin trigger fresh crisis on the EU's eastern borders. Flight records suggest. Really, it's a shocker. Just trying to work out whether, okay, we've got some more missile news coming in. Allegedly, Ukrainian missile flying in the direction of Crimea. That one looks like it's got fairly wide. I don't know. Could be similar to the one in Bryansk there. Well, it's definitely similar. I don't know if it's the same one. So a couple of incidents there. I don't know if that's the same missile spliced with two clips of that same missile spliced together. Who knows? But anyway, that's Bryansk region. So that's good news. Thanks to King Raccoon for keeping on top of that. I think Belgium plans to provide Ukraine with F-16s in about a year to a year and a half, according to Defense Minister Franken. I thought they were going to go before the end of the year. We're receiving aircraft on schedule. The first F-3 F-35s have already arrived. They still need training before they can be deployed, about 1 to 1.5 years. Oh my goodness, it's way longer than they need. F-16s, they need like 70 of them there now. I go back to, they are a game changer if you get enough of them. Okay, right, moving on. We are now going on to, sorry, just checking out the live chat as well a little bit. Thanks, Joe Hales, for dropping in. Really appreciate that. And thank you so much for your very generous support, Joe. Super, super cool. Cheers, mate. Politico offers its own version of what happened on Friday. So I've already gone through this in my previous update on the negotiations, the meetings that there have been. The Financial Times came out with an article which saw the meetings as very abrasive, that somewhat aggressive, cursing and throwing maps around. The Washington Post had a similar sort of approach. Politico has taken a different angle. So it depends who your sources are and depends who's doing the, who the sources and whether this is, I don't know, the American administration trying to put the other side of the story here. But Politico offers its own version of what happened on Friday. Ukrainian Republican supporters advised Zelensky to cancel the meeting and not insist on Tomahawk missiles. That could be because the timing was bad, right? Because this was all about Gaza, and actually the meeting for Ukraine to ask for Tomahawks was just coming at a bad time. Zelensky left without the Tomahawks, but insiders attribute this to the poor timing of the meeting given the events in the Middle East. Trump did at one point return to discussing territorial concessions, but ultimately accepted Zelensky's position and told him he would try to end the war along the current line of contact. During negotiations, the Americans said Putin wants to keep fighting. Putin has a strong military machine. Witkoff interjected and said that Russia wants to seize all of Donbass and the Americans were testing the Ukrainians to see what they would agree to. This is what I talked about a lot in the previous video, which is not that they're advocating for Ukraine. So they're meeting with Ukraine. The Trump administration is not fighting, sorry, not fighting is the wrong word, not arguing, not negotiating, not advocating on behalf of Ukraine, right? They are just looking at getting this wrapped up as quickly as possible and actually probably want Russia to come out slightly better here so we can have these wonderful trade deals with Russia. And so when they are proposing what Russia says, they're actually saying, look, well, Russia said this. Russia want all of the Donbass, and they're hoping that Ukraine will go, yeah, okay, then we'll sign up to that. Ukraine went no, and then the US went, okay, what next? So it's like, the US they're just laying these things down in the hope that Ukraine signs up to what will actually be a very bad deal for Ukraine. But it's not in the US's interest or not in the Trump administration's interest that Ukraine do well out of this. There is no just deal. That's why you always hear the European and Ukrainian leadership talk about a just and lasting peace. You do not hear the Americans have not mentioned a just peace since Biden was in, right? It's not part of the objectives for the Trump administration. They do not care if there is a peace without justice. So Witkoff's interjecting and saying blah, blah, blah. Zelensky refused to give up lands, and Trump ultimately ended the meeting with the words, okay, let's try to finish this along the current lines, which is actually now what the Europeans and Zelensky have come out with their statement today. Go and see my last video on that. Okay. So then we have this. This is Witkoff and Jared Kushner speaking on 60 Minutes. President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, said he is actively working on ending Russia's war in Ukraine. In an interview with 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl, said that he said to Leslie Stahl, peace is infectious now, and more people want to do deals. Doing a peace deal is becoming infectious. People want to get to this place. I don't think it's coincidental that leaders are now coming to the White House saying, how do we move a peace deal forward in Ukraine? Witkoff said. Special envoy also shared that this call between Putin and President Trump was, quote, a very good, very productive one. Now, that is not the language that they used about the Zelensky chat, which was cordial. That was the most positive adjective I think that we've heard them use. But actually, it appears very clear that at least Witkoff here is saying, well, the call we had with Putin was very productive, very good. Not so much with Ukraine. And it's just the language and the way that they speak about Putin, sorry, and about Russia. It just gives you all the indications that they are aligned with Russia. Certainly, Steve
Always
Witkoff.
Available to Steve as needed. Doing a peace deal is becoming infectious. People want to do them. People want to get to this place. You know, it's not. I don't think it's coincidental that leaders are now coming to the White House saying, how do we move a peace deal forward in Ukraine?
What happened with Putin today?
I think there was a very good call, very productive call. You know, we don't stop after just one deal. We keep on plugging away.
So I always say concentrate on the little things. Just a little thing like that sentence is a very good, very productive call. Now, you might think, well, yeah, and so it should be blah, 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 blah. But the way, the smile on the face,
Now that you've shown your...
the way he talks about Russia, the way he talks about a phone call with Putin tells you that he, I think, is more intuitively aligned with wanting to do what Russia wants than wanting to do what Ukraine wants. And that, to me, is the Trump administration all over, right? Here, I'm back. I don't know if my internet just went a bit funky. So here we have Christopher Miller from the Financial Times. I don't know where this is taken from, but I think this might be direct comments from Zelensky in this white excerpt here. Okay, so Zelensky is clearly annoyed with Steve Witkoff, as well he should be, right, from what I've just said, who views the war as some sort of real estate transaction. Remember, he is a real estate mogul, very much like Donald Trump. That's how they see the world, and pushes Kremlin talking points. Recently pushed Kiev to accept Putin's demand for the rest of the Donbass because it was incorporated into Russia's constitution. Oh, well, okay, if I write the constitution, if I just rewrite my country's constitution that includes the United States, I guess I can help myself to the United States. So Zelensky's comments here are pretty pointed. The position, so quote, the position of the Russians hasn't changed. True. They want us to withdraw from Donbass, not the entire east, but specifically Donbass. That is completely from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. I made it clear that Ukraine's stance in this context remains unchanged. I explained this both to President Trump and to Mr. Witkoff. We understand that Mr. Witkoff is simply conveying what Russia means. This does not necessarily reflect his own view, at least according to him. Wow. So, at least according to him, concentrate on the little things, they give you a window into the larger things, right? So he's saying, well, Steve Witkoff said that he was just reiterating these Russian talking points, but he said they weren't necessarily his own opinions. Well, at least that's what he told us. In other words, yeah, I'm not sure I believe that. For sure. I made it clear to him that there are some misleading impressions. So Zelensky here is saying there are misleading impressions coming from the Americans here. The story is that the Russians claim they supposedly held a referendum among the Russian people in Donbass, and that they supposedly want to join Russia. But first, there was the occupation, and only afterwards did something uncontrolled and clearly illegal happen, which they called a referendum. Moreover, I would say that these signals from the Russians are so far from reality that 10 years passed between the start of the occupation and the so-called referendum. Do you see where it doesn't add up? Mr. Witkoff points out that it was incorporated into their constitution. So I explained to Mr. Witkoff once again that if tomorrow Putin adds something else to their constitution after the war ends in one way or the other, we will need to withdraw from some territory again. And if, for example, I amend the constitution of Ukraine to include 2 regions of the Russian Federation, would they then leave those territories? This is a non-functional model. Boom. That's what needs to be, like, the reason I use analogy, like, you'll notice that whenever I'm having discussions, I always, I will use Doris and I use his analogies because the human brain really, I think, responds well to analogies, which is to say, look, if the logic over here, like, it's, let's leave this context so we're not poisoned by this context and the baggage we have with Ukraine, Russia, right? Let's leave that. Let's think up some abstract context like Doris in a house, or you're talking about the English language. Well, do you agree that Americans speak English? Do you agree they speak English because of the British Empire? Do you and the British influence in the US? Okay, do you agree? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, do you think it's right that we demand that the US comes back into the fold of the British Empire? And do you think it's right that the US has to do that? No, you don't. Okay, so you disagree with that. Well, how can you disagree with exactly the same logic over here type thing? Analogies are so important because then there is just they're trapped essentially by saying, well, yeah, I clearly think it's nonsense over here. Okay, well, how are you special pleading your way out of this situation over here? You've got to come up with something pretty good to get out of this one, because otherwise, I'm sorry, the US is going to be part of the British Empire, right? And you're not a fan of that. So this needs to be done, I think, in public. So to me, like, what pees me off about reporters is that they don't do enough research, I don't think, and they're just not sometimes quick enough, or this is why I think philosophical background is often quite useful, because you cut your teeth on arguing to crap over everything, like always. And if you have an opinion, have a conclusion, have a position, and you put it out there in the public. This is what I used to do when I was blogging, philosophical blogging. It's like, here are my thoughts, here are my opinions, here are my conclusions, and you put it out there, and then you say, like, go and criticize everything I'm saying, and then people do that, and then you're like, right, I'm not, okay, it's clear that I'm not justified in holding to this view anymore. This is peer review. This is public peer review, and so for someone like me, it's like, I'm really used to making sure that every position I hold is justifiable. So I always talk about this when I do my hits and losses videos. Like, I know I keep repeating myself, but I get new viewers, but I say, look, here are the general staff figures. How credible are they? Okay, let's go through the same thing every day, and we build up to a conclusion where we think, okay, these are somewhat credible, and they tell us something with the trend lines, and we're looking at this dot and this dot and this dot and this dot. We join all those dots up, and here's the picture. And when it comes to politicians being interviewed, they're just not held to enough account. These reporters need just some lessons in philosophical wrangling, so that when these people say stuff on public television, you're straight onto them. Like, when I'm listening to people speak, I'm all the time listening to holes in their logic and holes in their argumentation. And then it's like, nope, that doesn't work. I'm going to pause the video and tell you why that doesn't work. Now, I'll be doing that in real time if I was sitting next to them. But it just, and I've said this to you many times, but it's really frustrating when journalists just have or interviewers have a list of questions, And all they're thinking about is getting through these questions. And this is why someone like Mehdi Hassan is one of the single best interviewers in the world, is because he doesn't give a damn about the questions he's got. If he doesn't get an adequate answer on the first question, then he will just put the paper aside and say, right, let's go to town on this first question. I'm not letting you go. We can go on for 20 minutes just on this one question, but until we bottom out what you have to say on this, until you can justify your position, we're not moving on to the next question. I'm not pressuring myself to move through a set of questions because that's irrelevant. Like, essentially, that's just, you think you've put in this time into thinking about all these great questions, so you think you have to ask them. Bollocks to that. You've seen me on my live interviews with people. They just chat and let's bottom out this idea, and we spend as long as we like on this idea, and if we don't have time to go through all the questions I have in my mind for you, then who cares? You know, I feel really, really strongly about this, and the level and the quality of interviewing, I think, it is very poor when these people need to be held to account. You know, this isn't a chat show interview. This is someone who's making decisions, life and death decisions on the outcome of a war, right? Like, you need to be freaking justified in what you're saying here because people are dying. Anyway, end of rant. So, yeah, we're in a situation where Peskov is saying, look, a load of homework needs to be done before the meeting between Putin and Trump. So that's an excuse to stall. And then we got Lavrov coming out and saying, well, no, our position is exactly the same as it was when we were in Alaska. So unless the root cause is going to be solved, you know, who cares about freezing the front line? So it looks very much like Russia is not going to be willing to negotiate in a way that the European leaders and Zelensky have set out, which is, yeah, we'll agree to a frozen front line and then we'll negotiate. Russians are like, no, we want these root causes solved first and then we negotiate. And the US is left in the middle yet again, going, prevaricating, and then, you know, because Trump isn't strong or that he's got that compromise over him, he just feels completely unable to ever give any consequences to Russia. There's no further sanctions. There's no further weaponry. They are selling weapons to eventually to Ukraine, but so is Slovakia, you know, so is Serbia, right? So, you know, what are you doing beyond making some money out of Ukraine's situation? Russia's negotiation stance to halt troops at existing positions remains unchanged, said Peskov. They're not going to change. They're not going to freeze the war. So, you know, they're telling you, Trump, they're telling you they're not up for it. What are you going to do? You should have a statement out today that says, okay, now we're going to give tomahawks. Like I said to you, I think this morning, my position is that Europe now needs to get really ballsy. The UK and France need to go, right, do you know what? This ain't going anywhere. It's not been going anywhere for 7 months. The US has been pissing about. Trump's freaking useless, right? What we're going to do is we're going to have a no-fly zone, and we just take a chunk of the Western Ukraine off the map now. That's going to be a no-fly zone. We're going to be patrolling it with Eurofighters or maybe even prop planes, things that can shoot down drones, and Eurofighters as well. And then we're going to have actually British, French air defense systems or whatever placed inside Western Ukraine to protect civilians and Ukrainian industry. We're not attacking Russians. We're attacking the things Russians are sending into Ukraine's sovereign airspace. And we're going to do that. And what are you going to do, Russia? Because at the moment, you've got North Koreans fighting for you inside Russia. Well, they've got British and French not fighting for them, but helping them to defend inside Ukraine. What are you going to do? Because we were completely toothless when you got North Koreans to come and help you. But you cannot, you know, if we're going to do logical analogies here, if you're saying it's okay for you to have North Koreans there, then it's okay for Ukraine to have British and French here, or whoever. We need to get ballsy now. Nothing else is working, right? Yeah. Anyway, Putin's propagandists have been laughing at Trump for following Kremlin orders. So this is Julia Davison, Russian media monitor. I've said for a long time that they need to show these videos. They need to show these Russian propagandists speaking on national television, ridiculing Trump, and they need to show them on Fox News so that everyone and Trump sees how the Russians are ridiculing them. If Trump was to see Russian state media ridiculing him, he might actually feel a bit different about the situation. I think it's incredibly important. This, if I was a lobby group, like a Ukrainian lobby group, I would be lobbying Fox News to be showing clips of this. Honestly, it would be so important for Ukraine's PR. Russian state media is openly mocking the US and claiming Trump was following Putin's secret plot to pull and bait and switch on Zelensky. If Fox News were reporting that Russia thinks that Trump is a weak ruler and is manipulated by Putin, then Trump would get embarrassed. I've told you many times before that one of my approaches to diplomacy with Trump is to somehow communicate to him that he is Putin's poodle. You don't need to like say it to him critically to his face, but like through certain media outlets, I would be urging this idea to be put out much more publicly, that Trump is very weak. He's a weak president, and he's weak in front of dictators who are much better at manipulating him than he understands. He needs to realize that he is Putin's poodle. 100%. Okay. On that note, from Russia's papers, I think yesterday, Steve Rosenberg said, this is a quote from a Russian paper, quote, "In the Trump tug of war, Russia is leading again. Before he meets Putin in Budapest, Trump will be pulled in the opposite direction by calls and visits from Europe. Then Putin will pull him back to our side again." So the Russians are very clearly telling their readership, their public, that, oh dear, you know, well, not oh dear, that say, oh, look at Trump, what a weakling he is. He's in this tug of war, but Putin will put him back to our side again. It's this idea that Trump is often on Russia's side. Sorry, I have to send a quick message here. Please entertain yourselves for a second. I'm doing a live. That's my son there. So sorry, lots of messages as family is getting back and all sorts. So anyway, they are the Russian media is certainly aware that Trump is weak, that Trump is Putin's poodle. Okay, now we have Euromaidan Press saying that if Ukraine accepts a bad territorial deal now, I'll get shut out of all future. It'll get shut out of all future negotiations. This comes after Trump relayed Putin's demands that Ukraine give up Donetsk and Luhansk, though Trump later denied pressuring Kyiv to surrender territory. Zelensky added that American officials are already repeating Russian talking points, like claiming Ukraine would use any ceasefire to prepare new offensives. He sees Putin's territorial demands as a way to claim victory without actually caring about developing the regions he's trying to seize. All valid points. I mean, you know, they can't afford, Ukraine can't afford to have a bad deal now. It's very difficult to predict the future, but you know, if Russia are not completely, if Russia are not in a massively weak situation when they're doing these negotiations, if they are in a situation where they can resurrect themselves fairly adequately, then it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine to be able to reverse a bad deal, right? So a bad deal will only happen. A bad deal can only be reversed if Russia completely capitulate. But then, if they completely capitulate, then Ukraine should get a good deal. So, in other words, Russia needs to completely capitulate. They need to crumble. They need to have an economic collapse for Ukraine to get a good deal. Which is why it goes back to, you know, Ukraine's military success is contingent upon Russia's economic collapse. Okay, so then we understand that Zelensky is going to meet with Macron. The president of Ukraine said that he discussed with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron all relevant aspects of diplomacy and our recent contacts with partners. Now is the right time to push the situation towards an end to the war. And the main thing is to fully use all opportunities and correctly put pressure on Russia. Pressure on the one who started the war is the key to the solution, Zelensky said. Sorry, I just do have to write a message to someone. Sorry, this is what happens when lives happen at inopportune moments. Right. So then we have more here from the Kyiv Independent. Zelensky is to join the coalition of the willing meeting in UK this week. That's excellent news. It is yet again another example of Ukraine getting done over by the Americans, going to America, having a meeting, it not going well, and then rushing back to Europe and saying, please help us because US has done us over again. That happened in February this year in the ambush in the White House. But actually, the last time when the Europeans went to the White House, it was better. But definitely, the European support is very important for Zelensky. Indeed, there was someone, I think it might have been a Ukrainian politician or a Ukrainian analyst, was saying that it would be useful if Zelensky was accompanied in the White House by Europeans, or that he wasn't on his own, or that the Ukrainian delegation wasn't on its own, that there needs to be unity and also the strength of European diplomacy when Zelensky is at the White House. But I don't know how viable that would be. But anyway, October 24th, so that's 3 days away. There's going to be a meeting in London for the coalition of the willing. Right, talking about the EU is preparing a new membership rules set that could speed up Ukraine's accession. According to Politico, the EU is considering accepting new countries without granting them full voting rights at the initial stage of membership. So this is quite interesting. Such an approach, the initiators believe, could ease opposition to enlargement from several member states, including Hungary. So it could be that Hungary are worried about Ukraine joining the EU because they might vote in ways that Hungary aren't particularly fans of. So it could be this staged approach where they kind of pay into the EU and they get the benefits of the EU, but they don't get voting rights until certain things are achieved or certain time has elapsed. New members would receive most benefits of EU membership, but their veto rights would be temporarily limited until institutional reforms are completed. So it's like, okay, you've achieved 2/3 of what we asked you to do to accede to the EU. You can get a limited accession to the EU, but until you get all these other things in place, then you won't be able to have full voting rights, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like a hybrid approach. Some tepid tea. Lovely. Okay, soothing those vocal cords. Right, talking about Hungary again. Orban, this is from Szabadon Magyarul, says Viktor Orban is about to lose big in the next election in the spring of 2026. Of course, I think he will if there are free and fair elections. Obviously, he doesn't like it, nor Trump and Putin. They don't like it either. But Hungary has never been more convinced to show to the world that Hungary is not Orban. And if we can do it, nothing is lost. He's referring to a further poll. And there was another poll. I read through a poll previously, which had the same results as this. So I think this is another poll with an 18-point margin. So this is really good news. That's Tisha up 18 points on Fidesz, which is Tisha's gone up another one, Fidesz down another one, smaller parties much further below. This really is an incredible poll. Well, someone says not exactly, but national poll average. You've got to watch out. Some of these polls are very pro Fidesz, and so if you're going to make averages based on manipulated polls and whatnot, you need to be a little bit careful. but nonetheless, that's really good news, at least as a data point there. And we're going to go from Hungary to Georgia just quickly. The Georgian Dictatorship Party, the GD, Georgian Dream Party, is doing everything it can to ensure that their country will never become a member of either the European Union or NATO. The only ones who benefit from this are, of course, Russia, but also China. Now, Georgian Dream Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze has said that the ruling Georgian Dream Party will announce in the coming days the list of political parties it plans to seek bans against. This is what all good democracies do, right? Speaking on the Georgian public broadcaster, Kobakidze said the list will be made public once the lawsuit is officially filed with the Constitutional Court. He said the bans will target parties, quote, made up of members of the bloody regime, referring to the former ruling United National Movement, as well as those who have engaged in, quote, sabotage against the state alongside them. Kobakidze said that up to 10 parties, including smaller groups, could be affected. Defending the plan, Kobakidze claimed the move would, quote, open up the political space by ending what he called an artificially imposed bipolar system between Georgia Dream and a collective UNM backed by foreign agents. He argued that only after such a purge could healthy political forces emerge. When asked whether parties founded by former UNM members, such as the Coalition for Change or the Federalists, would be included, Kobakidze said that by our logic, yes, but added the final list, which may include up to 10 parties, will be clarified soon. In other words, there is looking like there's a slide there towards much more overt, much more explicit autocracy in Georgia. There is, unfortunately, it's looking pretty dire there for the ideals of democracy and freedom. Tim White said the other day, oh my God, it gets worse in Georgia. The Friday fascist raids also involved. So what happened? Georgia's fascist regime has carried out mass arrests of civil activists this morning. Tbilisi Life recorded at least 9 detentions are known so far of some fairly high profile protesters. Only yesterday, the pro-Russian government passed the 4th law targeting protesters. And the Friday fascist raids also involved searches at the homes of twice Prime Minister of Georgia, Irakli Garibashvili, ex-head of the state security, Grigol Liluashvili, and former Prosecutor General Otar Parchaladze. So I hope I pronounced them okay, but yeah, not looking good there. And then Tim White, again, the Russification of Georgia continues. More terror raids by the pro-Moscow government this morning. Journalist Keta Tsikishvili and student activist Tamar Tladze are among the latest to be detained. Police stopped Tamar's minibus heading to West Georgia and took her back to Tbilisi. It is, and still on Georgia, yesterday, the fascist regime arrested Grandma Azza, a familiar protester. Police surrounded her and confiscated her medical mask. When Russia invaded, Azza Adamia became quite well known for burying Georgian soldiers left abandoned by Russia. It is, looking, unfortunately, more and more like Georgia's going to really struggle to wrest back any semblance of democracy there from the Georgian Dream Party. A real shame. Okay, King Raccoon says, according to TVP World, which is a Polish broadcaster, Norwegian F-35s caused a sonic boom intercepting Russian spy plane above the Arctic. So it's all going on. Okay, we're going to go back to Europe. Italian firms shipped $2.3 million in industrial equipment to Russia in 2024 to 2025, including sanctioned CNC machines with military uses. The goods appeared at Moscow's Metalworking 2025 Expo. Some traveled through Kazakhstan and Turkey to dodge EU restrictions. Oh my goodness, like the frustration of not having these loopholes tied up. Really, really annoying. Right, we're going to go on to some, I think, important subject matter here in terms of trolls and bots and whatnot. So I'm going to start off with this as just an example of a bot, or not, of a troll here. So Derek Tainus here, Romanian source, says, worth keeping in mind that for the most part, the online fan base of your country's right-wing party, whatever country you're in, is probably tweeting from Karachi, Mumbai, or Chelyabinsk. So Red Pill Media, who's quite prominent online, I am an American. Yes, I like Hitler. No, I don't believe in the Holocaust narrative. Millions of young Americans agree with me. So this is the idea that, you have here a supposed American trying to influence other Americans being pro-Hitler, pro-Holocaust denial and saying that he's American and that other Americans agree. And there's luckily a community notes here saying readers added context they thought people might want to know. This poster is from Pakistan, and there's like a kind of doxing of that, and it's very similar to some other famous ones like Ian Mars Chong and others, you know, sitting in their base in Singapore or wherever it is, in their basement. These people are all over the shop, and then it's not just people. Remember, it is also bots, automated accounts. We're going to look at that in a second, but first I want to bring to your attention Elliot Higgins here saying the UK government has released its response to the House of Lords media literacy report. The Lords warned that poor media literacy threatens democracy itself. The government agrees, but its plan focuses on coordination more than transformation. However, you know, here it is, introduction. The government is grateful to the House of Lords Communications and Digital Committee for its report on media literacy. The report examines the current state of media literacy in the UK and the challenges posed by the evolving digital landscape and the opportunities to strengthen public resilience against misinformation and disinformation. This is so super important. The committee rightly highlights that media literacy is a foundational skill in the digital age, essential for enabling individuals to critically engage with content, navigate complex informational environments, and make informed decisions. I personally think it should be on the secondary school curriculum. It is somewhat on the primary school curriculum to a degree in internet safety, but actually like more formally to do with disinformation and misinformation. I think it needs to be part of the secondary school curriculum in the UK. As the report sets out, the proliferation of online platforms and the increasing sophistication of misleading content have made it more important than ever to equip people with the tools to assess the reliability and intent of the information they encounter. The government shares the committee's view that media literacy is a shared societal responsibility involving collaboration across government, regulators, industry, civil society, and the education sector. Yeah, also needs to be huge regulation. We welcome the committee's recommendations and acknowledge the need for a coordinated and strategic approach to media literacy policy and delivery. Here's the problem, of course, that the US is bullying other countries around the world when they're doing trade deals to bring back, to take down their proposed digital regulation legislation or digital sales tax, digital services taxes and whatnot. So you've got Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, I don't know, David Sack, all these people lobbying with Donald Trump, lobbying the Trump administration to act on their behalf when they're doing trade deals. So then the US comes to the EU, the US comes to the UK and says, right, you want to do a trade deal? Right, we do a trade deal because we're threatening to put 30% tariffs on you. So let's do a trade deal. Let's reduce those tariffs to 10% across everything. By the way, we won't reduce the tariffs unless you get rid of all of this digital services regulation. So then the UK is in this quite impossible situation. I do understand this, and I'm not trying to be pro-Labour. I'm actually, like any government that was in this position, I understand that this is the dilemma, and I don't know that there's a solution. Either we get economically screwed over by the United States, people lose their jobs, we get inflation, and we lose the next election. So either that happens, and we get regulation of social media, or we get to keep lower tariffs and the economy is not so hit, but we allow outright disinformation into our social media spaces. That is a horrible dilemma to have. You're playing off the economic growth, or not even the growth, the stopping the decline, stopping the economic decline of your country is played off against digital regulation. And I freaking hate that. I hate it. I hate the fact that I see the United States as bullying other nations at the moment. Sorry, not the United States, the Trump administration as bullying other nations at the moment with an economic baseball bat, threatening them with tariffs, everyone with tariffs. And if you don't do what we want you to do, which is take away regulation, then we're going to beat you. It really is frustrating. This response outlines the government's position on the committee's conclusions and recommendations. It sets out the actions we are taking to improve media literacy across the UK, including through regulatory frameworks, I hope so, and partnerships with key stakeholders such as Ofcom, which is our communications regulator. The structure of this document corresponds to the committee's recommendations and provides a detailed response to each point raised in the report. Okay, so I look forward to going through that. Now, I just want to then tie a couple of points up here, or join a couple of dots. Elon Musk is bringing out Grokpedia. This is to wage war against Wikipedia, which he sees as too liberal. And he says, right, Wikipedia sucks. We've already retrained the XAI model to become more and more right-wing, more and more right-wing. He's retrained it a number of times. He's retraining the algorithm on Twitter to become more and more right-wing, more and more. Now, you could be right-wing out there. I have many right-wing viewers, but when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about not your kind of like moderate conservatism. I'm talking about like some extreme stuff. Like Elon Musk is pro AFD, pro like the most extreme form of right-wing politics here. And he looks at the knowledge that Grok is imparting, knowledge, scare quotes knowledge, that Grok as the AI model is imparting to anyone that uses it. And he says, I want that to be as skewed to the right as it can possibly be. And now I'm coming out with this model for Wikipedia, an alternative Wikipedia, and it's called Grokpedia. And he was going to launch it this week. And he's postponed it because, quote, we need to do more work to purge out the propaganda. He is trying to provide an entire knowledge network, a library of knowledge that is skewed towards propagandistically to the right. Now, he's saying he's fighting against liberal propaganda, but actually what he's trying to do, like when Grok was being asked what are the stats on right-wing violence, and it was coming out with all of the reports and the stats that have been done over the last 40 years to show that actually political violence in the US is done more likely by those sitting on the right than those sitting on the left. And he didn't like that, and so that's when he started retraining his AI models, because they were, he thought, being too liberal and having biases. They're not. There's literally, you go and do the research then, Elon Musk. You go and actually sort out your methodology, go, you know, work out how to do it, and you go and do the research yourself. And come back to us and make sure it's peer reviewed. And once it's peer reviewed, you can put it out in the scientific, you know, into the scientific realm. But until you do that, stop wanging on about there being bias when you are the one that is biased, and you are showing your bias all over the shop. Anyway, when you're talking about digital literacy, you know, it's understanding that if you are going to go on Grokpedia, and if you are going to now ask Grok questions, understand that that has algorithms that have been programmed by someone with a massive ideological bent here. And you should be super worried about that. I am super worried about that. Then I'm going to bring this. It's all about, hey, man, we are joining the dots here at ATP Geopolitics. It's what we do regularly. Let's join some more dots. Alex Prompter here says, this might be the most disturbing AI paper of 2025. So a bit of scientific paper, but nice bit of synopsis here. Scientists just proved that large language models, so things like you Groks and whatnot, can literally rot their own brains the same way humans get brain rot from scrolling junk content online. They fed models months of viral Twitter data, short high engagement posts, or rage farming and that, and watched their cognition collapse. Reasoning fell by 23%. Long context memory dropped by 30%. Personality tests showed spikes in narcissism and psychopathy. And get this, even after retraining these large language models, these AI models, on clean, high quality data. So once you're trying to cure the AI model back to where it was, the damage didn't fully heal. The representational rot persisted. It is not just a bad idea leads to bad output. It's bad data leads to permanent cognitive drift. So in other words, once your man here, I'm joining the dots, and actually I'm doing this fairly off the cuff here. I wasn't thinking I was going to do this. I love it when a half-formed plan comes together. If Elon Musk is going to retrain Grokpedia to be skewed to the right on bad data, then it's going to be very, very hard indeed to retrain it back to do good data. I wonder if Benny Pite is still listening to this, because this is his wheelhouse and he knows a lot about this. the AI equivalent of doom scrolling is real. So, you know, when you're just endlessly looking at TikTok or any kind of rubbish media, and then you're just rotting your brain, well, actually, AI can do that itself. The AI equivalent of doom scrolling is real, and it's already happening. So this is the full study there, and you can go and look into that. LLMs can get brain rot is the paper from those at Texas A&M University, University of Texas, Austin, and Purdue University. Okay, so right, then I'm going to show you this. So now we're going into look at some pretty extraordinary stuff here regarding outright disinformation, not just kind of brain rot disinformation. Whoops. So what happened here is that the police did some big raid. This is Europol, European police doing a raid, actually arresting some people. And this was a massive bot farm full of all sorts of sims and accounts and whatnot. There you can see all of the devices that are connected here. Just incredible. This is huge. I wanted to talk about this yesterday. I just didn't get a chance to do this video yesterday. Europol has just dismantled the sim farm for hire platform that powered 49 million fake accounts used for global fraud. Now, okay, so this has a financial element to it, but you know, this also has a propagandistic element to it. This is in a basement, a single basement in Latvia, one basement in Latvia, 50 million accounts. Remember that when you see someone say, I love Russia in your comments, and just think of the scale of those operations in India, Nigeria, and Russia proper, where these farms not only don't get raided by police, but are actively supported. That is a challenge. Unless they're like Elon Musk, right, has the chance here to do something about it by self-regulating, right? He knows how many freaking bots and trolls and non-real people are active on Twitter, and he chooses not to do anything about it because they are generally going to be aligned to authoritarian, right-wing, dictatorial viewpoints like Russia, like authoritarian ideologies that come from North Korea, Iran, China, etc., etc. And actually, Elon Musk exists in that kind of ideological framework. So he's not doing anything about it. But my goodness, he should. Like, this is I think it's criminal that he is able to be in charge of such a huge network or a social media network and not be held to account for the absolute dross on there. I mean, I stay on here because I need to, because there's lots of amazing stuff on Twitter still. There really is. And there are, you know, you can see at the top here. No, you can't see at the top here. Why can't you see at the top there? Is that something? Right, you can't see my tabs at the top there. That's interesting. It cuts them off. But basically, 90% of my tabs at the top of the screen are Blue Sky tabs. So I try and get my stuff from Blue Sky, but there are certain things that I can only find on Twitter, and it is a very useful resource. But he should be held accountable for the international manipulation of this site. Now, that what you just saw there, the breaking down of those doors and what they found, absolutely incredible. So here is Europol's website. So results of the action that day: 26 searches were carried out, 5 individuals were arrested, approximately 1,200 SIM box devices were seized, which operated 40,000 SIM cards, hundreds of thousands of further SIM cards released, 5 servers with infrastructure of the illegal service seized, 2 websites offering the illegal service taken over by law enforcement and splash pages displayed, 431,000 euros in suspects' bank accounts were frozen, $333,000 in suspects' crypto accounts frozen. Get that to Ukraine. 4 luxury vehicles seized. The true scale of this network is still being uncovered. Measured by volume, more than 49 million online accounts were created on the basis of the illegal service provided by suspects. The damage caused by the renters of the telephone numbers to their victims amounts to several million euros, so on and so forth. This is absolutely phenomenal, and it's really good news that they have been successful. Europol there, really happy with that, because I am super worried about the future in the information spaces in which we all exist, right? And I just would love some self-regulation of Twitter. Failing that, some decent self-regulation. Failing that, the EU and UK, well, the US, every country needs to get involved with regulating the hell out of that site. Okay, right, we're going to go now to the last section in of this video, but I just want to say thank you very much to Kevin Forst, who is a total legend. Thanks so much for your support. It's really appreciated. Thanks to Joe Hales again, as I said earlier, and of course Aussie Rob, really appreciate that. JJ here says, if Putin doesn't want to deal, why even have a meeting? Well, yeah, that's the point. And the Russians are postponing the meeting, but the Americans should look at what Peskov and Lavrov have said and say, as I said earlier, screw you guys. We're now just going to go full on supporting Ukraine and putting pressure on Russia. But of course, Trump won't do that, because useful idiot, because loves dictators, because compromat agent. I don't know. Pick and choose. So frustrating. Tom, thank you very much. Doris will appreciate that. I mean, goodness me, that poor woman, she's had just beating after beating. She routinely loses a house. So thank you. She will appreciate that. It's amazingly generous, by the way, Tom. Thank you. Johnny Nevergard, super cool. Thank you for your love from Norway. Tom from the US, I presume. Thank you. Okay, we are going to start with reform here and connections to Russia again. And they seem to be quite quite wide scale, should I say. Here's Carol Cadwallader doing a bit more research here. Well, actually, this is from 2017, but this is a reminder. So if you remember, Nathan Gill, the reform leader for Wales, has been found guilty of taking bribes from pro-Russian elements to propose a pro-Russian narrative in the EU and in general media. And then we've had Nigel Farage's connections through Russia Today, through saying pro-Russian things in the EU, parroting exactly the same narrative as Nathan Gill. And Nathan Gill was doing that because he was paid. So why was Nigel Farage repeating pro-Russian talking points in the EU and on television? Was he being paid? If he wasn't being paid, then why is he parroting the pro-Russian narrative? Is he just existing in that information space? I don't know, but it needs to be investigated. Well, actually, it's worth reminding ourselves of some of these pictures. This is a picture from Dana Rohrabacher, saying, today, my son Christian and I went fishing in the ocean off Newport with British member of the EU Parliament, Nigel Farage. Farage is a recognised leader of the Brexit movement, which won a great victory when British voters ratified the proposal for Great Britain to leave the European Union. He's not only a historic figure, but he is also a student of history who is deeply committed to a new world based on freedom and nationalism versus corporate globalism. The conversation was good, but the fish weren't biting. We caught one. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? Well, the point here is that Dana Rohrabacher is pretty controversial. So what is the story here, said Carol Cadwallader back in 2017. New photo of Farage emerges with Putin's favourite congressman and associate of Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was done for connections to Russia, right, during Trump 1.0. And in the end, he had to go. He was actually brought back to the campaign in Trump 2.0, by the way, or they tried to. Absolutely outrageous. I mean, not a more obvious Russian agent than Paul Manafort in American political history, I would say. Who is Dana Rohrabacher? Well, this chap is an American former politician who served in the US House of Representatives from 1989 to 2019, representing California's 48th congressional district for the last 3 terms of the House tenure. A member of the Republican Party, Rohrabacher was defeated by Democrat Harley Ruder in 2018 by a 7.2% margin. During his tenure in Congress, Rohrabacher expressed strong pro-Russia and pro-Putin opinions, which have raised questions about his relationship with Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. Politico dubbed him as Putin's favorite congressman. There has to be an investigation into Nigel Farage. How we can have a leader of a political party in the UK who has put someone as leader of Reform UK in charge of Wales, who has accepted bribes from Russia, how this guy who magics up money to the tune of 850,000 odd quid to buy a house, but then it's in his partner's name. She's now being done for fraud in the EU. If that money came from him, he should be done for tax evasion because he's broken the rules. And he has been on Russia Today at least 17 times. They wanted him to have his own program on Russia Today. And here he's pictured with one of the single most pro-Russian congressmen in recent US history. Join the freaking dots here. So then it gets interesting. Actually, no, we're not going to do that. I think that's next. So this is Paul Mason saying, this is how you do it. Farage is a Kremlin echo chamber and the British people are waking up to it. This is in the House of Parliament.
The Kremlin
today,
blaming NATO.
House of Commons.
Of course, I will give way to the Minister.
Minister Dowden.
Chair, I'm surprised that the Honourable Gentleman has the gall to come here and talk about national security today, when the former leader of his party in Wales admitted taking bribes from Russia, and when yet again he has been using talking points right from the Kremlin, blaming NATO for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Absolutely shameful. The Mauritian Attorney General was interviewed on Mauritian TV today, Madam Chair, and he said regarding his tweets, the Honourable Gentleman's tweets claiming that Mauritius was negotiating a lease on Paros Banos, that this was, and I quote, a gross falsehood and a political gimmick. And he talks about the United States. The Defence Secretary, Secretary Hegseth for War, he has said, Diego Garcia is a vital military base in the United States. The UK's deal with Mauritius secures the operational capabilities of the base and key US national security interests in the region. We are confident that...
So on and so forth. I mean, you don't really need to know about the Diego Garcia thing for the purposes of this video, other than, you know, I think he needs to be robustly challenged, as you saw there at the beginning by that parliamentarian. Nigel Farage needs to be challenged all the time on his connections to Russia. And you know he's feeling it because, not as Pippa Crerar here says, Nigel Farage is trying to counter his Russia problem, a potentially damaging electoral narrative that he poses a risk to national security. I honestly think this needs to be hammered home to him, but now he's picking up on this being a weakness. There are plenty of Reform voters who would otherwise vote Reform, but if it wasn't for his position on Ukraine. I know here, people have told me in the threads here that they would like to vote Reform, but his position on Ukraine is so problematic that they aren't going to vote Reform. I would not vote for them for a whole host of reasons. Actually, very little to do with immigration, more to do with loads of other issues I have with Reform, like they're, well, whatever. I've been through that previously. But here, exclusive, Nigel Farage tells Bloomberg that if he led Britain, he, one, would support shooting down Russian fighter jets entering NATO airspace. Wow, way stronger. So you know that he's reacting to some bad polling areas where he is seen as weak, which is where it concerns Russia. So he's now said, oh yeah, I'm up for shooting down Russian fighter jets. Use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Wow. Okay, so this is a guy who was previously saying that Ukraine was invaded because of EU and NATO expansionism. Now he's read the tea leaves and he's changing. But of course, you know, I think there needs to be an investigation into his true connections to Russia. May even put British troops on the ground there as part of a UN peacekeeping force. And he's also vowed that no more Reform politicians had corrupt relationships with Moscow. Look in the mirror. These are by far Farage's strongest comments yet on Russia and mark a major pivot after he came under cross-party criticism that he is soft on Putin. He made the comments in an interview for the Michel Hussein show, a new video podcast from Bloomberg Weekend. By the way, that was so embarrassing. He was so condescending, Nigel Farage, to Michel Hussein, who's a really good journalist, been around ages, does really good stuff. And he said, look, love, blah, blah, blah. And he was just really kind of almost sexist and condescending. It was a bad look for Nigel Farage. Anyway, Farage said that Nathan Gill's scandal was appalling and pledged that without any shadow of a doubt, Gill is just one bad apple. I believe 100% with all my heart, there's nobody else. You, mate. Obviously, Putin is a very bad dude, Farage said. I was really hoping that Trump would bring Putin to heel, that some kind of compromise could be struck, as it's just been recently struck with Gaza and Israel. Clearly, that is not going to happen. Asked what he would do about incursions into NATO by Russian jets, Farage said, gotta shoot them down. On whether the UK should use frozen Russian assets for Ukraine, clearly, if they're there through illegal means, they should be. Asked if he would put British troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, Farage said, I'd be very cautious about doing that. While he said he would not want badged British army officers there, he could support their presence under a United Nations banner, saying he might put a UN force, think about a Korean approach to it. Farage's remarks appear to be an attempt to counter a potentially damaging electoral narrative that he poses a risk to national security. Quote, I suspect that you'll see over the course of the coming months the Americans beginning to deliver Tomahawk missiles to Kiev. Didn't happen. I think Trump feels that Putin has made a fool of him. That has happened. Farage said, clearly Putin is not a rational man. However, he did repeat his criticism of NATO, saying, quote, the endless eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union contributed to Russia's decision to invade Ukraine. Okay, so interesting, but it doesn't surprise me that he's doing that. But goodness me, he needs to be investigated himself. I think that is a sensible thing for him to do. I think he will win voters back or voters over if he goes strong on Ukraine, supporting Ukraine and against Russia. He needs to drop the NATO expansionism thing and EU expansionism. I know he hates the EU, but do you know what? Just drop that. And if like I say this about Trump, if Trump was to properly embrace supporting Ukraine, he would have way more supporters than he presently does in the Republican Party and the Republican base. The fact that he's gone wingnut MAGA, like he would take MAGA with him if he supported Ukraine fully. He really would, in the same way that Farage would take those disaffected voters who are pissed off with him over Ukraine. He would take them back easily. It would just be, I think, he wouldn't lose anyone by going hard on supporting Ukraine there. So that is sensible from Farage. Now, I talked to you the other day. I just wanted to add this because I did a video on reform the other day, which I think is pretty fair what I said. I know I'm not a fan of reform, but I was trying to look at where they are politically in the UK. And something I keep talking about is how expensive life is becoming at the moment. I gave you an example some time back. I met on holiday someone who was politically aligned to me, but the reality is he's saying, look, I know these two, like couple over 60, and they've got now an adult child who is too difficult for them to look after. He's got social, emotional, psychological difficulties. I don't know if there were learning difficulties involved, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. And he needed 4 people to look after him at night, in the daytime, and 2 people at night, I think. Full-time people to look after this one person. And he said that was costing the local council, Dudley County Council, it was costing them £1 million a year. So this one chap was costing £1 million for the council. Now, I say this only not because there's any solution here other than, life is becoming more expensive and we are having more complex needs as both children and adults. I know this involved. I've been a governor at a primary school. I've been involved in teaching myself. I'm talking about, I know like the prevalence of special needs. I've got my own son. One of my own sons is on the spectrum, etc., etc. Right. So like there are so many needs, and we can talk about why that is, and there's very interesting conversations about premature children now coming full term that previously wouldn't have survived. They're now surviving, but then that comes with a whole load of extra issues, not universally, of course, and many premature babies that do exceptionally well and are absolutely fine, but just on balance, go and look at the research. There's loads of research into the connection between literary issues, behavioral issues, antisocial behavior, and premature babies coming to full time, that 23 week, 24 week, 25 week, 50 years ago they wouldn't have survived, now they do, but loads of developmental issues, oxygen not getting to the brain, all sorts of other things. Okay, so the simple point of the matter is, and this is relevant for geopolitics, because actually all modern Western countries or democratic countries and advanced countries, or whatever, however you want to define them, are going to have this trouble. So this is my county council. This is Hampshire. This is where I live, right? Hampshire County Council now spends 83% of its budget on social care. Children's social care from 2011 to 2012 was here. It's now here, 23 to 24. Adult social care was here, like over doubled. And then other social care on top of that has actually gone down. So some of it's moved to like adult and children's social care. Now, 83% of our like Hampshire County Council is a massive county council. This isn't like central government. This is, you devolve services to the county council, and it's a big old county council. That's 83% of the budget. So I keep talking about how, oh, sorry, you can't see this. Sorry, I was banging on. There it is. So we are entering a time period where I think life is becoming more expensive, and this will necessarily mean that taxes need to go up. The only other thing you do is you destroy the welfare system, which means that you are not going to provide social care for these people, which means that if you're going to have a child that is born or that develops challenges, behavioral, cognitive, and then they become adults with behavioral cognitive challenges, that we just, I don't know, what do we do? What do you want to do? Assassinate them? Leave them for the storks to pick up? I mean, look, what do we do? So we either care for people or we don't care for people. I would suggest that we care for people, right? And we become we maintain ourselves as caring communities, and we support people, but that is going to only become more challenging going forward. 83% of the budget, it's not like you can just sit there and slash that budget, because that will then affect like criminality. It will affect, you'll need to spend, you slash here, you have to spend over there. So, my thesis is that life is becoming more expensive, as in, when I say life, as in society, not kind of inflation and stuff like that, but to run a society, as we understand more of our needs, but as there are more complex needs for a whole different set of reasons. And then you can add in social media, how that might be playing with people's brains and our addictions to technology and our addictions to this. I don't know. I just think that life is going to become more expensive. Why am I talking about this here in this kind of reform bit? Well, I talked to you about the other day in my reform video about how some of these populist parties that are like AFD, Rassemblement National, and Reform, if they come into government, they are small government parties, and they will slash governments as a way of having small government, low tax, so on and so forth. That's why they're being funded now. Like Reform is getting a load of money from previously Conservative Party donors who are seeing Reform as their vehicle for power in the next election to get small government, low tax, and so on and so forth. But if you want small government and low tax, you slash the welfare. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's going to happen to the children? What's going to happen to the adults in social care? However, I would also say, and you're not going to get this from Reform or the Conservatives, because they are all about privatizing. But I can tell you, in fact, I'm looking at a person who's told me an awful lot about this, because my partner's daughter works in social care, and she has told me that, and she's worked in these homes at the weekends to get extra money. She said that most of the residential care homes are now privately run, and they screw over councils. So part of where you can save money is renationalizing or taking social care providers back into the public purse, right? And that's not something reform would do, because they're totally against that. But they are getting the amount of profiteering. Ash Sharkar was on BBC Question Time the other night, and she absolutely nailed it in terms of how much profiteering is going on in the social care system. And it is absolutely true. And I can verify that with firsthand knowledge of this. So I'm just quite interested in what the direction of travel is going to be in the UK, but this is going to be the same for every European country as well, I'm sure, is the cost of adult and children's social care is going to go up, and government's going to have to work out how to deal with that. And no government is going to campaign on raising taxes. How do you deal with that? Then you're going to get people disaffected with things like immigration. You get right-wing populists in, they take over, but they don't know how to run countries and concern themselves with proper governance of things like adult and children's social care, education, so on and so forth. And I think we're just setting ourselves up for an interesting next 15 years. Now, I'm going to stay on reform for a bit, because again, this is a warning to other countries in a similar position. The person you can see on the screen at the moment is a chap called Danny Kruger. Danny Kruger was a Conservative politician. He's just defected to Reform, so he's now a Reform politician. He's also a Christian nationalist. This is quite a rare thing in the UK. Now, he and a chap called James Orr. So James Orr is a theologian at Cambridge who is also a Christian nationalist, anti-abortion, like proper, like kind of MAGA American Christian nationalist. The James Orr has just been taken on by Reform to be Nigel Farage's advisor. This guy, Danny Kruger, is a Reform MP. They are looking at going down the Christian conservative trajectory, Reform UK, and they're taking on advisors that are going to do that. They are taking money from I believe there's a lot of money in these kind of areas from abortion, anti-abortion advocates and right-wing sort of conservative churches in the US, etc., etc. Now, you're starting, like I've said to you before, Reform are taking on MAGA policies wholesale from the US. And one of the things that was fascinated that was heard the other day by Danny Kruger, and here he says, this is Danny Kruger saying, Labour, Conservative and Lib Dems today all agreed, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to bore you about what he's banging on about Maccabi Haifa fans and blah, blah, blah. But it's this point at the end. Only Reform UK will change the law to put the police under the control of elected politicians. So you have Reform UK looking at ICE in the US and saying, we can do that here. Because at the moment we have independent police, right? Our police is independent from the government in a way that our government, our politicians can't get the police to do what they want them to do in terms of like become their own private internal security services. Reform are saying that's what they want. So only Reform UK will change the law to put the police under the control of elected politicians. He's literally told you that. There's a word for countries whose police don't have operational independence. This is a revealing glimpse into Reform UK's plans to turn the UK into a dictatorship. Honestly, like, I warn you about these things, and then the politicians come out and say them, right? These people are, in my opinion, authoritarian. They want to just do MAGA republicanism UK style-y. Evolved Politics says this is absolutely terrifying. Reform said they would impose a police state in the UK, or at least facilitate what could eventually become a police state. They want to abolish the police's operational independence and take direct control. Governments only ever take direct control of the police so that they can use them to target their opponents. And that's what you're seeing take place in the US at the moment. And talking about that, I just want to bring this to your attention. This is absolutely staggering. ICE, the border guards essentially in the US, are buying guided missile warheads. Jesus Christ, says this person, we are not going to like what comes next. So ICE have increased weapons spending by 700%, including purchases of chemical weapons and guided missile warheads. ICE was always going to be Trump's private military to deploy domestically against Americans. Pay attention. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with like a trajectory here. It's like, look, we want our police, say Reform UK, to be under the guidance, under the power directly of politicians. Okay, well, what's happening when it looks like that in the United States? Oh, my goodness. And then let's go to the New Republic here, reporting that ICE spent 700% more on weapons. What they bought will terrify you. Independent journalist Judd Legum reported Monday that between Trump's inauguration and October the 18th, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has increased weapons spending by 700% compared to the same period last year. In the last 9 months, ICE has spent a whopping $71.5 million on the purchase of small arms, ordnance, and ordnance accessories manufacturing. Small arms include armor, explosives, chemical weapons, pistols, and rifles. Ordnance and ordnance accessories manufacturing refers to other materials such as artillery, barrels, extractors, and mounts. For comparison, in 2019, I spent just $5.7 million on small arms category through October the 18th. And during Trump's first administration, the government spent on average $8.4 million per year. So this has gone up exponentially. While most of the spending was on guns and armor, Legum reported that ICE had also purchased, quote, guided missile warheads and explosive components. So while Trump has backed off selling Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, it seems he's more than happy to arm his immigration authorities with lethal projectiles. It's not immediately clear what part of the good faith deportation operation would involve localized destruction and murder, but that's because no such thing exists. So who knows what they're going to be using those things for, but it is pretty scary if accurate. Okay. And the last two things, I'm just going to go back to the Venezuelan boats. This is John Kirby. If you remember John Kirby when he was under Biden, I liked John Kirby, the former retired United States Navy Rear Admiral and National Security Advisor.
The Trump administration went ahead and repatriated two survivors.
What does that tell you?
Boat.
So this is talking about, and I mentioned this the other day, I did a whole video on the Venezuelan boats or Colombian boats. It depends on, you know, who you're listening to. There was a boat strike the other day where the Americans blew up a boat. And then you've got the Colombian president saying, hang on, these are fishermen, genuinely not drugs people. One of the fishermen, a guy called Caranzaro or something like that. He's been a fisherman all his life. His daily fisherman activities are here. You know, he is locally known very famously for being a very dedicated fisherman, and he was blown up on this boat. Right, this was not a fishing boat, and it turns out that two people survived from one of the boats that they blew up. And the Americans, if you think these are drugs traffickers, you think, right, they survived, let's take them in and we're going to put them in detention and we are going to, you know, put them in prison for drug trafficking. But instead, they've repatriated these two people. Why would you say, hey, you can come and live in the United States if these people are drug traffickers? So people are now saying the American administration themselves are admitting that they're blowing up civilian boats erroneously because they're now repatriating survivors of the boats that they've blown up without putting them through the court system because they're actually drug traffickers, because they're not, they're freaking fishermen.
Which tells me that even they have questions about the legality of what they're doing. If these individuals were in fact really enemy combatants, legally so, then you'd have no reason, nor would you have any really incentive to repatriate them. You'd want to bring them back and put them through the court system here in the United States and have due process visited upon them if they are in fact enemy combatants, and you could hold them captive as well. That they didn't do that sort of makes me wonder whether they think they've got much of a case, whether they don't want this to happen inside the U.S. court system. The
plot thickens, essentially. And finally, I just want to, I'm sure most of you know about this already. There's a picture of the White House. Literally, that is actually the White House. It's not AI. Trump has now started knocking down part of the White House to build his ballroom, but he didn't have congressional permission, and he said it wouldn't actually do this. So when he said we're going to build a ballroom, he said he won't be affecting any of the building, and he turns out to have actually knocked some of the building down. As someone says here, Putin is watching the greatest triumph of his life. You've got a president that's just unilaterally deciding to knock down part of the White House. No congressional oversight, no congressional permission, just going to do that because I want a ballroom. And by the way, he's spending $200 million on a ballroom. He's building that now while the government's shut down, while people aren't getting paid. It is absolutely unconscionable, I would argue. Yeah. Kirill Dmitriev, let's have a bit more of him as the Russian who's taken the mickey out of Exeth wearing a Russian tie there. Anyway, there you go. That's my tuppence halfpenny for what's going on around the world. I am going to have to leave you soon, not least because I need to go to the little boy's room. But also I've kept you on for way too long. He is indeed, of course, a property developer. And I guess he's doing what all property developers do, which is knock down things and put up shiny new things. And I don't know that you can sell it off for a profit, though. Okay. So Hutch says, like reform, I am the same way with Republicans above state level. If not for Ukraine, I would vote Republican across the board. Bad foreign policy outweighs the domestic policies I like. Yeah, the only thing I'd say now, Hutch, and thank you for your A, for your support, and B, for your candid comment here. I would just argue that Trump's MAGA policies are not Republican. He's not a conservative. But and any stretch of the imagination. So conservatives usually do things quite slowly. Like literally, that's what conservative means. You want to conserve your institutions, your norms, and your traditions, right? Take, for example, what Trump is doing with the White House. He's knocking it down, right? Knocking parts of it down without permission. That's essentially a good metaphor for what he's doing with American policy and American institutions. He's ripping things down. Doge went in, ripping things up, burning it down quickly. That's populism. That's right-wing populism. That is not, I would argue, typical Republican conservatism. It really isn't. And left-wing populism would do similar things, rip down institutions, burn it down, start again type thing. Oh, we don't like that. We distrust this part of the government or whatever. But your centrists and your centre-left and centre-right are much more likely to do things a little bit more slowly. And Hutch, I would just argue, and you may agree with me, I don't know, but I would argue that most of his domestic policies, you can maybe exclude some of the general things he's doing with immigration, but actually some of the ICE things, I think most people disagree with the way that ICE is handling abducting people off the streets. Not everyone, but even he's underwater publicly on that, by the way, as well. So most people, according to all the surveys, actually he's underwater on every single policy, including the ones he would traditionally be above water on the most. He's underwater on everything at the moment. But I would argue that his political agenda is not Republican. It is not conservative, but it is, I think, far right populism. Yeah. And so I'd like to think if I was a Republican conservative Republican, old school, maybe Reagan Republican, I would disagree with Trump on both foreign policy and domestic policy at the moment. Like, you would not find a neoliberal Republican supporter from the 80s and 90s supporting across the board tariffs. That's regulation. That's economic regulation. That's across the board taxes on your own consumers. Like strategic tariffs, fair enough, but across the board tariffs, that's not a Republican strategy, I would argue. Policy. So it's just crazy, I think, what's going on there. They're just ripping up the rule book and going to town on everyone and everything. And I'd like to think that not just Ukraine, but there are other elements to the domestic policy book that you might disagree with as well. But hey, I can't see inside your head, so who knows. But thanks, Hutch. Really appreciate that, mate. Right, thank you very much to everyone. Yeah, see, Nikki Haley. Yeah, so she was genuinely, she was a sensible Republican. She got caught in the middle of not going to town on Trump enough. Like, she held back. I think she should have just gone to town on Trump. And she wanted to have a job after the not with the Trump administration, but have a future in the Republican Party after Trump. But she's now cast out into the wilderness, really. And she should have just realized that was going to happen anyway, and just gone to town on him and been a full-on, almost like Chris Christie style of like anti-Trump Republican, but kept to her guns. Like she was pretty strong on Ukraine. I think she wasn't the best because she had to differentiate herself from the Biden administration, had to criticize him on certain things. So I think her approach to Ukraine wasn't quite pitch perfect, but it was certainly a hell of a lot better than Trump's. And she, like, her husband is in the armed forces, and so she had, you know, good reason and good, I guess, better experience of that kind of foreign policy side of things, especially as being as she was former ambassador to the UN in Trump 1.0. But yeah, no, I would have said Nikki Haley would have been, honestly, like, orders of magnitude better than Donald Trump as a Republican for the United States. I simply don't think you can. I think the Republican Party has changed now to MAGA, and he's taken most of the politicians along with him. That, you know, many are too spineless to do anything about it. So I think it could change its name to MAGA now, and there needs to be a split of old school, just like in the UK. You know, the Conservative Party are trying to work out whether they become Reform 2.0 to battle Reform, or whether they become a kind of centrist old school Reagan Republican or Thatcher Republican Party, right? Of like sensible, or like more sensible old school conservative politics. You know, there's Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop. I'm sure he would agree with me, because he, you know, I'm sure he won't mind me saying that he sits in that area, and he doesn't like Reform. And but where is the Conservative Party going to go? Will it just try and be another Reform to try and wrest back those voters from Reform? And that's a busy area, because they'll have to become more and more like extreme in their policies, which is what you see with people like Robert Jenrick. Anyway, that's to get very UK political there. Yeah, so that's why we need electoral reform, and we need proportional representation. We just need those, because first past the post, it changes the way people do their political manifestos and agendas, just because you're always vying to be the number one in a given constituency, rather than saying, look, we can adopt this area on the political spectrum, and however many votes we get around a country will turn into politicians. But no, it's like we have to win in any given constituency first past the post. So we then have to like outcompete every other party to win the majority in every single constituency, and that changes how you develop your policies. So that will tend, I think, to see the Conservative Party become a new Reform, rather than adopt their own little place in the political spectrum. We need political reform here. We need to get rid of first past the post, and we need proportional representation, as does the United States. You will only ever have a two-party electoral system until you get electoral reform there. But of course, neither party will want electoral reform, because it means you'll go away from a two-party system where they have the most power concentrated. In a two-party system, no party is motivated, is incentivized to reform the electoral process, because both parties benefit. There's only two. It's the narrowest form of democracy, but they will never vote in reform for that. So it won't ever happen. You're stuck. We're lucky in the UK that we managed to get third parties involved. So the Lib Dems, and then the Greens came along, and then you got Plaid Cymru and the SNP in localised in areas, and there was enough general support in constituencies such that third parties could get elected. Only very occasionally do you get independents in the United States, but they're not members of third parties. And I think the barriers to entry in the US are just too high for any third party to ever get off the ground there. It's just not going to happen. Goose Springsteen joining me late. You trying to stop me going to the little boys' room? Is that what it is, Goose? Don't want to keep you from the loop. You said that. I didn't read this yet. See you in the comments section, JP. Thank you very much, mate. Great minds think alike, Goose. Great minds think alike. And fools seldom differ, as the saying goes. Thank you very much, Ronin, for thinking my observations are in any way cogent. I appreciate that. I never quite know. Imposter syndrome, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but occasionally, you know, it may be that I'm correct. And thank you for listening, guys. Okay. Really appreciate all of you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for hanging out with me. Cheers, Dan, for your support. And yes, I do need to get some relief. I'm starting to rock. I'm literally rocking backwards and forwards a bit here. Take care, everybody. I have to go. A big love to you all. Slava Ukraini. And I guess the final thing to see is whether I really do need to go, but let's see if there is any news from Ukraine in terms of missile strikes and whatnot. Not hearing anything. Oh, Russian stock market, because it had gone up with what Trump had said. It now looks like it's going down. So that's good. Some Trump-Putin meeting, the halting the preparations for that. So that's going down. I'm just coming, just signaling to my partner out there. And European nations going over a 12-point peace proposal. So that looks like trying to take on the Gaza-Israel thing. But yeah, don't think we've got any news yet of explosions taking place, but there are missiles that have been sent into Russia. I guess we'll have to wait to see if anything happens there. Massive attack on Russia. SPU destroys Russian light engine aircraft. I don't know about that. We'll see. Anyway, take care, everybody, and I will speak to you soon. Toodle pips.